Thurston County Sheriff Derek Sanders, I think we have the picture here. Pull it up. Breaking my heart. Thurston County Sheriff Derek Sanders was at a bill signing last week alongside Governor Bob Ferguson. As Governor Bob Ferguson signed into law what he claimed was $100 million in grants to hire more police officers. Of course, as we pointed out on the show last week, that's not at all what the bill does. That's a complete lie. So we kind of wanted to ask Sheriff Sanders why he was there. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Okay, a little bit of background here. So we're, of course, talking about House Bill 2015. And this is the bill that fulfilled one of Bob Ferguson's key campaign promises that, hey, we're the last in the nation for police officers per capita. We need to fix it. I'm going to make sure we get $100 million in funding to give directly to local law enforcement agencies so they can hire more cops. Here's Bob Ferguson speaking about this at the bill signing last week.
In my inaugural address, I made a promise that this legislative session we must provide significant funding to hire more law enforcement officers in our state. We ranked last, 50th per capita in number of law enforcement officers. That needs to change. I pledge to work with both sides of the aisle to ensure this critical funding made it through the legislature. I'm so pleased to have House Bill 2015 before me now to help address this situation.
Yeah. So, of course, that's not what it does. There is no guarantee in that bill that even a dollar of that money will be used to hire law enforcement. Cities and counties, there's this long list of things they have to abide by to get any of the money in the first place. And they have to essentially agree to police their communities in the way that Democrats want them to police their communities. And they have to agree to violate federal immigration laws in the process. And they have to have a specific separate sales tax increase that will complement the grant funding. And they can also use the money, if they do get the grant funding, on things like peer counselors. Yeah, non-uniformed police responses. The kind of things that Democrats think are a good alternative to police officers with badges and guns. So the bill isn't at all what it was sold. So you can imagine I was a little heartbroken to see some members of law enforcement with the governor in uniform because I really felt like they're being used as political props. Particularly Thurston County Sheriff Derek Sanders, who was standing off to the left of Bob Ferguson as he was signing the bill, and he was also standing right in front of State Senator Manka Dhingra, who's a total anti-cop hater. So we asked Sheriff Sanders to come on the show, and I asked him that, basically, if he thought he was being used in that moment as a political prop by Bob Ferguson. Sheriff Sanders, welcome back to Undivided.
Thanks for having me.
All right, okay. So first, I've always been curious, how does one end up at a bill signing?
Well, I got the special invite, I think, from the governor's staff, so I'm special.
You're special, okay. You felt special getting it?
Yeah, I thought this bill is a step in the right direction, so I was happy to be there.
So let's talk about how the bill has evolved and sort of what you think is good about it versus bad about it. So, his promise had been $100 million for additional police officers, and it had always been sold as being that simple. And so obviously the end result is not that, as the Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs has pointed out. A dollar doesn't have to be used to hire more police officers. So
That's
I guess,
correct.
has your understanding of the bill changed over time? Or, I mean, so what was your initial expectation of what the governor wanted to do?
Well, I think I was right on par with the governor, right? We understand that we're ranked 51 out of 51 in the country. It's going to take a lot of effort to get us even to not being in last place, just to being in 50th place. But with that being said, my initial understanding was like, hey, we're going to get a $100 million grant to hire more FTEs for law enforcement officers. I knew there were going to be stipulations, and I knew there were going to be pieces in there that were both beneficial to, state government and law enforcement agencies about having model policies and things like that. So that was my initial, I think, dream for the bill, if you will. And, Brandi, I already know what your take's going to be on this. I know what a lot of my deputies' take is on it. But at the end of the day, here's the thing. When you're in last place, when you're in 51 out of 51, you'll take anything. You'll take any kind of funding that can possibly head toward a better solution than what we have today. And obviously, we saw the bill get tweaked. We saw that it began being, encompassing all sorts of different things that you can spend the money on. However, I think there's enough momentum in this state right now that you're going to see a lot of jurisdictions opt to use that money with what the governor initially wanted that money to be spent on. But your point stands. You could use this to spend the money on quite a few different things that may or may not help a problem. And for me, again, we're in last place. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, because you're a Democrat, I'm not going to take your money. I'm not going to take your support. It's very much anyone who's willing to throw a viable solution at this problem, you have my ear.
Yeah, and I get that. And that's the position you're in. I mean, for you to alienate one political party, which accounts for a lot of the people in charge in your county, is detrimental to public safety at the end of the day. I mean, you have to be able to work, and you've always been that way. I 100% get it. You don't have the luxury I have to just yell at people on a podcast and there not be consequences for it. But at the same time, you know that I don't care about political party either. I mean, I look at actions and words are one thing. And if there's this big contingent of Democrats who wants to help the police, like, where are they? Where have they been? What have they been doing? They might be telling you these things. They're not saying these things publicly in any form or fashion. I guess on this issue, I feel like you can kind of draw a line and say that Democrats have pushed through policies that have been not only detrimental to law enforcement, but have made this a place where law enforcement doesn't feel respected and they've gone elsewhere. So, I mean, don't you have to kind of call a spade a spade?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying that there aren't people in those parties who are saying those things. And I have my own opinions of that, right? I clearly disagree, like, inherently with every bone in my being. I just wanted to also acknowledge that, you know what, like, here in Thurston County, especially at the local level, a lot of Democrats are like, how can we help? They endorse the public safety tax that, quite frankly, has done more than the state has done in 30 years here locally in Thurston County. I mean, we passed the public safety tax with overwhelming Democrat support in Thurston County. And the primary source of that funding is going directly to the sheriff's office. Yeah. Not to peer counselors, not to public defense or prosecution. It's to put more deputies on the road. So I just have a hard time sometimes of like, well, this party thinks this way. I mean, here locally, I've found a lot of support from people on both sides of the aisle. So my whole thing is like, I'm going to continue to rally that support and try to make the best sheriff's office possible. That's my focus at the local level.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I just disagree. I need to see more. I also hear from some Democrats behind the scenes who, have said, opposed to the police pursuit law and all of that stuff. But it's like, okay, well, don't say it to me, go and say it on the floor of the House or the Senate as these things are going for a vote, and then I'll believe you. The other element of this, of course, as you mentioned, is some of the training requirements and some of the sort of attestations that you have to do to be able to get these funds. One of them being, you're going to violate, in my opinion, federal law by not, helping immigration enforcement, which is already the law here. So that's sort of a non-issue. But some of these things aren't even mandated in state law. It's like best practices per the Attorney General's office or the Criminal Justice Training Commission. So I guess what's the motivation there for making you attest to you're going to follow all these things to get this money?
Well, I think it's part of the stipulation. You're right. And Brandi, there are people in our community who don't trust us. And that breaks my heart. Because I want the trust of everybody. I want people to feel comfortable calling 911 and knowing that someone competent who's caring, compassionate, but can also take care of business is going to show up. And I think that's where I was kind of getting to earlier. Like, I can see the angle from the governor, from the lawmakers of, okay, if we're going to sign on to this bill that could potentially put a lot more police officers on the street, we want the best police officers possible. We want the police officers who are following best practices and model policies. And, quite frankly, when I glanced through the bill, I mean, as the sheriff's office, I'm pretty sure we're eligible. We're following best model policies and whatnot. I'm sure if they had their way and made a pursuit best policy, I wouldn't qualify because we chase criminals and we put them in jail. And some people don't like that. But I can see that angle of it, right? And like I said earlier, like, this is going to be compromised. There's not going to be a bill that comes through that just says, here's a bunch of money, go spend it. There is going to be compromise in this, and that's the compromise I'm willing to make when you're at 51 of 51. Yeah, and it sort of, to me, it screams, and my concern with it is like best practices according to whom? According to the party in power and according to the people who they put in charge at the Criminal Justice Training Commission. So you really have these people who, some of them, I don't believe they've taken a lot of time to understand the difficulty of the job. I mean, these are people who restricted your ability to pursue violent criminals, and they, like you said, thought that was a best practice and, used totally defunct data to try to prop up their political point. So I just don't trust them to make best practices that are actually going to keep the community safe. And so that worries me. It's like they're trying to model police departments in their image as politicians. Yeah. And, to some extent, there are best practices that I don't necessarily agree with, but most of them I do.
Yeah.
I'm sure if they made a model policy for pursuits and said, here's our best practice, well, we've already seen what they think that best practice is. I was very vocal and outspoken about that. But quite frankly, most of the model best practices that are noted in that bill are like use of force. And quite frankly, it is the best practice, right? We should be using the least amount of force possible in every scenario. We should be, we should have a culture that tries to preserve life and all those types of things. But I'll tell you what, you show me a best practice that's truly terrible in the world of law enforcement, and I've probably spoken out against it.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, you said you knew that compromise was going to be part of it. But do you believe the public was sold a bill of goods that is not true on this? Do you believe the public thought they were getting something that they are not getting?
It depends on who you ask, right? I mean,
I'm asking you.
The thing, I would say, well, I mean, it depends on who you ask at the beginning, right? I mean, the governor obviously made a statement of what he wanted in this bill. But the governor is also one person, and, he ultimately only has so much authority too. So I don't want to put this all on him. I think that his endeavors were great. I 100% supported it. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And then I saw compromise along the way, and I think to some degree, citizens have to recognize that compromise has to take place in this stuff. So there are going to be people who are like, well, I thought we were getting $100 million just for cops. And then on the other side, there are going to be people who didn't want $100 million to go towards just cops. And compromise ended up somewhere in the middle, and we're going to get more cops out of this. I can tell you that people are going to spend money to get more cops for this. So yeah, there's going to be people on both sides who, as a result of compromise, aren't going to be happy.
Yeah, I would feel differently about that had he stood up at this bill signing and said, look, I didn't get everything I wanted. This doesn't fulfill my campaign promise, but it changed along the way, and this is better than nothing. That's not what he said, though. He basically reiterated and took like a victory lap of, I'm fulfilling a campaign promise here, and made it sound like it's money for cops strictly. And that's just not what it is. So I guess that brings me to what you knew I was going to ask you about. I saw you there and it broke my heart. I'm sorry, it broke my heart. My little heart quit to a million pieces because I saw someone who was being used as a prop in a press conference.
People use me.
Do you feel like you were used as a prop?
I don't. Because I still support the final bill. And I know that might be hard for some people to realize, but here's a piece that you have to know about the historical context of Thurston County Sheriff's Office, which is, it's my truth, right? And that is that there was an administration here running the sheriff's office who refused to run a public safety sales tax. Deputies were asking all the time. I was asking all the time, like, listen, most counties have a public safety sales tax to fund an adequate number of law enforcement officers. We don't. It's no secret why we're in second to worst place in the state when it comes to staffing at the sheriff's office. And when I got into office, what I found out is that there was this sentiment of all or nothing, that all of the funding from this sales tax is going to go towards sheriff's deputies, or we're not going to run it. And I could not disagree more. Now, since I took over, I said, listen, we're going to run a comprehensive package that leaves a little bit of something for everyone. Our public safety tax sales tax, which was incorporated at the local level, gives 75% staff, 75% funding to the sheriff's office. The other 25 is split between prosecution and defense. So it's kind of a holistic view of the criminal justice system. Make more arrests. You need more prosecutors to prosecute. Otherwise, it's pointless. And then public defender workload goes up. Since we had that compromise and passed the public safety tax, the sheriff's office has never been in a better spot in the history of our office since 1852. A 30% increase in staffing. Deputies are getting pay raises. We've got a new building we're moving into. All of this is being made possible from this sales tax. I can't imagine where we'd still be if I thought, you know what, all or nothing. I want everything or nothing at all. And so that's the same pragmatic approach that I take to legislation. You'll remember that when we were debating the pursuit stuff, we were willing to have conversations about where the right threshold is. The other side took an all or nothing stance and they lost. Now, guess what? We can chase for any reason. That wasn't the initial intent, but that's what happens when you take these hard stances of all or nothing. Eventually you lose. And so my stance is like cemented in compromise, working forward, getting something that everyone can be okay with, and trying to do our best. And again, it's worked here at the sheriff's office. There's a reason why our staffing levels are improving, and we've seen a massive increase in candidates applying here. Not possible without compromise.
So you said you don't feel like you were used as a prop in your uniform. I think one of the things that stuck out to me is how few members of law enforcement were there. One of them was the King County Sheriff, who's a political appointee of a Democrat. The other one, behind the governor, was the head of a dubious law enforcement organization that they always use to say that their stuff is supported by law enforcement. So you sort of seemed like an outlier to me. And I guess I'll ask you this. When Bob Ferguson runs for re-election and he uses that shot of him with law enforcement around him and you're in it to say that he supports cops, will you be okay with that?
It'll depend, because we don't know what the actual results of this bill are going to be, right? I mean, to be fair, what happens if 75% of the organizations who receive this money put more deputies and police officers and whatnot on the road?
Yeah.
Like, then I think we've found that it was a success. I think there's a big draw to that right now, regardless of political outliers who say, no new cops, ACAP, whatever. On the other hand, you're right. If all that money ends up going towards something that is completely irrelevant to law enforcement, I mean completely irrelevant, then yeah, that's obviously going to be a weak spot if that were to happen. And quite frankly, I believe that the governor's intentions on this were great. I do. I think he legitimately wants to put more police officers on the road. That's a stat that no one wants to be associated to. So I would also feel bad for him if this compromise led to no additional boots on the ground.
You feel bad for him, really? Guy who never spoke out against police defunding, you'd feel bad for him?
Well, listen, I don't have to agree with everything everyone does. And I think that's kind of the political turmoil that we have right now. And I see it too, right? I've had people who are like, oh, so you're not going to go full ICE and start arresting people for immigration? Well, then screw you. You're a terrible sheriff. And I'm like, well, but what about all the other stuff that I know that you like? And I think we've just gotten to this point where, like, if you don't agree with every single thing someone's ever done, that you can't still be friends, that you can't still like the good things they do, that you can't still celebrate the good things they do. I have politicians here locally in the legislature and whatnot. They've done things I don't like, things I disagree with. That doesn't mean I won't still cheer them on when they do something that I like, when they have some good legislation, they support something that I do think is important. So both those things can be true at the same time for me. And I
get it. And I appreciate the nuance. I do understand that, I think politically you're an independent. I think that shows, but I also understand you have a job to do and your only focus is public safety. So you'll work with who will do that. I guess I'm a little jaded, but also it's not really it's the hypocrisy, I think. It's empty promises and, this expectation that we'll forget the track record of someone who was the attorney general for 12 years, who wouldn't lift a finger for law enforcement because he makes a promise in a campaign for governor. I have a hard time with that. I want him to mean it. I want this to work out. I hope it does, but I just have a harder time, I guess, forgiving and forgetting.
Sure. And I'll be honest, like, I know people have hard feelings about that stuff, and law enforcement as well. Like, we've seen it. I've read the headlines, I've seen the comments, I've talked to people. But at the same time, like, we have to be willing, especially, like, I think law enforcement staffing and corrections officer staffing in Washington state is dire. I think it's dire.
Yeah.
I think it is on the forefront of a public safety crisis. With that being said, it's never going to get better if we choose to also alienate right back and say, well, I didn't like what you did as AG, so, screw you as the governor. I don't think that's going to be productive either. Like, he's the governor now, and he won by a large margin. Getting some cooperation and trying to get, like, if there's things that we do agree on, we should be able to knock those out of the park. Yeah, they're signing legislation I still don't like. I still don't like I don't like the idea of that, if you're a convicted felon, you can steal a gun right now and go on a shooting rampage and get released. But if you're a totally normal person who's never had a speeding ticket, now you have to go pay for a permit to get a gun. There's some big discrepancies there that I disagree with. But at the same time, there's also other areas where those same people who voted on those things and put those into office, if they want to work with me on public safety staffing, I will drop everything and be at your doorstep tomorrow to figure out how we solve the things we do agree on.
Yeah, I get it. And I think it's what makes you a good sheriff. I might not like it, but we don't have the same job. So Sheriff Sanders, thanks for being here.
Thanks. Appreciate you, Brandi.
Yeah, we do appreciate him taking the time to come on. Harsh to say I think he was used as a political prop? Maybe. I also understand that if you in this state want to get something, you have to get it from Democrats because they're the only ones in a position to give it to you. So I know a lot of you wanted us to talk to Sheriff Sanders about why he was there for that bill signing for Bob Ferguson. So you ask, and we shall deliver. That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter to be alerted to opportunities to make your voice heard.